Copenhagen to Paris to Ottawa. World leaders are responding to scary times, but check out two very different approaches.
We are not at war with Islam. No religion is responsible for terrorism. People are responsible for violence and terrorism.
And now, how Stephen Harper portrays it.
Our government has never hesitated to call jihadi terrorism what it is, whether they're in their basement or whether they're in a mosque.
And it's not just his tone on terror. The Prime Minister also created controversy with his comments about wearing a niqab during citizenship ceremonies.
It is offensive that someone would hide their identity at the very moment where they are committing to join the Canadian family.
Both approaches have been criticized. Obama called blind to a terrorist threat, and Harper accused of fear-mongering.
It was irresponsible of the Prime Minister to throw the mosques into his comments. It was a form of Islamophobia.
The RCMP have been told to be careful with this kind of language too, that terms like jihadism succeed only in conflating terrorism with mainstream Islam, casting all Muslims as terrorists or potential terrorists. To talk about this, I'm joined by our panelists. Tasha Carradine is a columnist with the National Post and iPolitics. John Moore is a talk radio host in Toronto. And Ihsaan Gardee is our guest panelist tonight. He's the executive director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. So let's save talking about the comments about the niqab for just a moment and talk about the different tone of Obama and Harper. John, what do you think? Who's taking the right tone?
Well, it's a tough choice, and I wouldn't say I fall in the middle. I do favor Obama's interpretation of things. I find the Prime Minister is being inflammatory, and he's resorting to something that we often hear in talk radio, which is that it's always 1938. It's always the Nazis. We always have to go to war against something. And the fact of the matter is, it may be intellectualizing the thing, but Obama is right. We're not at war with Islam itself. If we were, there wouldn't be Muslims fighting Muslims. I mean, you know, Jordan's on board, Iraq is on board. So it's, you know, Obama's making the finer point, which is a much harder sell.
Tasha, I'll bring you in here.
Well, I think that Harper is actually speaking a truth a lot of people don't want to hear, which is that at the root of the issue, there is an issue of religion. You know, if it was another faith we were fighting, you know, we wouldn't have Islamic terrorists bombing in the name of Allah, killing in the name of Allah. There is Islamic terrorists happening. And I don't think it's always 1938. You go back to Ronald Reagan saying, you know, we were going to fight the evil empire. He got some flack for that, but he wasn't called a racist or a Russia-phobic, if you will, when he denounced the Soviet Union. I think calling a threat what it is important. I don't think that Harper is saying all Muslims are involved in this. Far from it. But I think he is saying that we have to acknowledge there is a religious component, even if it's a perversion of religion.
What are you hearing in these messages, Ihsaan?
Well, a couple things. One, there's the problem of giving legitimacy to these violent extremists. Basically, this is something that they're craving and actually they may want, and it may actually help them to attract new recruits as well. And when you're calling them by certain names, then they can look to their recruits and say, see, even our enemy is calling us, is calling what we're doing actually jihad. So there's the issue of granting them legitimacy. There's also the issue, obviously, as well, of alienation. So it's counterproductive. So you have people working on the front lines at mosques across this country, speaking out against violent extremism and terrorism. And then you have our Prime Minister coming out and making these kinds of comments, which casts a pall of suspicion over an entire community, right? Around the world, 1.6 billion. Here in Canada, 1 million. Based on the actions of a few individuals or a group, right? And in the same way that we don't say that, for example, the actions of the KKK are representative of Christianity, and I think most people would agree that they don't speak on behalf of Christians, in a similar manner, the actions of ISIS and violent extremists certainly don't speak on behalf of the broad majority of Muslims who have categorically and unequivically on numerous occasions come out and condemn this.
There's sort of I mean, the Prime Minister has a double-barreled shotgun, and he's using the same position as Republicans in the United States, which is not only to say this is Islamic, we are at war against Islamism, but also to suggest that anybody, such as myself or Ihsaan, who doesn't agree is somehow against their country. Or as Rudy Giuliani said this way, Barack Obama doesn't love his country. And that becomes a patriotic litmus test that I find really quite noxious. And as Al Franken once said, you know, the people like Giuliani love their country the way an 8-year-old loves his mommy. I mean, it's an irrational, overly defensive, constantly aggressive posture.
I don't think, though, that Harper's saying you don't love your country so much as he's saying the values of Western civilization writ large, or Western countries, democracies, are being attacked by people whose fundamentalist beliefs, which are rooted not only in religion, because the thing with militant Islam is that it is not simply faith, it is ideology. It is much ideologically as communism or Nazism. But the point is, but the point is this, it is an ideological fight in the sense that people are seeking a different way of life, disagreeing with the way of life.
Tasha, one of the concerns that I have here is that it's also potentially leading to a confirmation bias. If you ask people whether they're doing something in the name of their faith, they're obviously going to be saying yes. But again, if you speak to the broader society, the broader group of Muslims around the world, they have, as I said, categorically condemned what ISIS stands for.
I want to move this ahead into the other comments that created a bit of a stir in the last week or so, which was the niqab comment, saying that that's offensive at a Canadian citizenship ceremony. I mean, Tasha, is that going too far for you?
Actually, no. As a woman, I am offended, honestly, when I do see a woman who is veiled. It causes a reaction in me as a woman and someone who believes in charter values of equality to see that. I understand the woman in the particular case that it is her choice, and for many women it might be their choice. But in a country such as ours, where we have fought extremely hard for values where women and men are equal, to me, covering your face, it's not like wearing a turban. It's not like wearing a kippah. It is a denial of personal identity. And I think at the moment of citizenship, the Prime Minister is trying to say that this is not, at this particular moment is most important to affirm your identity when you are choosing your new country.
How does that make you feel, that she thinks that
the
niqab's offensive?
I can understand that feeling, and you know what? Many Muslims, actually many Canadian Muslims, are uncomfortable with the niqab.
Yes, exactly.
Over close to 60% of Muslim women, in fact, don't cover at all. And of those who cover, it's only a tiny fraction of the Muslim community of women who choose to wear the niqab. But here's the thing. Yes, equality is a charter right, but so is freedom of religion. And our courts have long since established that provided that a person's belief has a nexus in religion and it doesn't, the practice of which doesn't harm somebody else, they should be free to manifest that practice.
The question, though, well, I was just going to say, though, the issue of whether it is a religious belief and rooted in religion is also questioned within the Muslim community. Like you said, many do not feel it is necessary.
But again, the Supreme Court has said it's not for the government to be the determiner, arbiter of what is or is not religious.
What did you think of those comments about the niqab being offensive?
You know what, I think it was John Ivison said, the Prime Minister doesn't get the Constitution, but he gets the Canadian people. The Prime Minister is tapping into something primeval, which is 150 years of us being afraid of newcomers and all of their habits and how they're going to change us. We felt the same way about the Irish in the 1850s.
My parents were discriminated against. They were Germans. But that's not why I would react.
But can't I appeal to something in you, which is it's a higher conservative value that government can't tell people what to wear?
I want to move on because we're going to talk politics here. The Prime Minister, he made those comments about the niqab during a visit to Quebec. The Tories, they have 5 seats in the province now. He's been hugely unpopular there. But lately the Tories have seen a major change in fortune. So let's take a look. Last July, an Ecos poll had Harper's Conservatives at just 12% in the province. But since the terrorist attacks in Paris, Ottawa, Quebec, the Tories have soared to almost twice that, at 23% in the firm's latest poll. So, John, I'll come back to you. Is this calculated to appeal to... Is this everything's a political consideration, but is that what this is about? And would it work outside Quebec?
To have a winning hand, you have to be dealt a winning hand. And I think the Prime Minister, you know, and again, to quote, that he knows what's at the core of things. And I actually do not doubt for a second his sincerity in this. I don't believe it's a political ploy. I believe he thinks the niqab or any kind of face covering is offensive. The thing is, that's an easy sell in Quebec because that's where we had Hérouville. That's where we had the Charter of Values. It appeals to a nativist culture in Quebec, which has an even more intense fear of outsiders.
Well,
does that apply outside?
I think outside people also do question. There was an incident in Toronto with a school just a couple of years ago where young girls were asked to pray at the back of the room because apparently they were unclean at certain times of the month, and the children were taken out of class to pray. And this caused a great stir, and I'm sure you probably even discussed that on your radio program. So it's not just in Quebec where incidents do happen and people question how...
But is this a political calculation?
It is,
as the opposition is saying, is it pandering?
I agree. I don't think it's pandering, but I do agree it has political currency, no question.
I would say that it's certainly, I would disagree. I would think that it is pandering. It's clearly a populist ploy aimed at pure electioneering calculus and not based on principle or practicality. Again, if you're talking about the niqab and the citizenship ceremony, there have been numerous opportunities and options available for people who are wearing niqab to be heard saying the oath, whether it's having an FM mic attached to them or having a citizenship
So you don't think
official
it's
stand
real?
beside them. Well, they
The
can.
opposition to it.
Well, this is just this is part of the problem that. The objections to it have been based on the fact that people find it offensive. Well, people find cartoons offensive. They find speech offensive. And we have limitations on speech, including hate speech. But here we have clothing, and you have the right to be offensive with clothing.
I agree that the law right now, there is no question you have the right to wear a niqab at the citizenship share. There was nothing in the law that prevents you from doing so. I think what Harper was trying to say, and where I think resonates with a lot of Canadians, is the sense of values and the sense of accepting your country. And you're right, there has been prejudice against newcomers for a very long time, but there's also been a willingness of newcomers to accept values of the country they are going to. And I think that intersection, people do not
Last
see
quick
that.
point, John.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
then
I'll say I'm not
here.
a fan of niqabs, I'm not a fan of burqas, but I'm a fan of government getting out of our faces. And I don't wear in Canadian values. Does it say you must show your face?
It's a question of...
Tony's never even looked each other in the
John,
face.
it's not a question of where does it say you must show your face. It's a question of saying that the face in Western culture is personhood.
So are you afraid of a backlash here, Ihsaan, or where?
Well, I have a lot of confidence in our fellow Canadians that they'll see this for what it is and that they will move beyond it and past it. And I mean, we have to look at the bigger, broader picture here. Obviously, the Prime Minister can't campaign on the economy, which is still limping along. The dollar is weakening. The oil prices are down. So this is a natural go-to, a very easy go-to. It appeals to a lot of people. I understand people are uncomfortable with it, and it's a very popular appeal. But that doesn't make it right, and doesn't make it something that we should be doing. Our leaders should be leading and not stoking fear.
This debate is not over, but we are out of time. I can see you holding your breath there, Tasha. But the anti-terrorism bill is working its way through Parliament. There'll be more of this. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.